From a victim of China's Cultural Revolution to the self-proclaimed emperor for life, Xi Jinping dreams of building a powerful Chinese dream. But when Donald Trump hit China with a crushing 125% tariff and cracks began to appear within the Communist Party, one question looms large. Will Xi's dream cement his place in history as a second Mao Zedong, or will it collapse like a castle built on sand? Is he destined to become China's greatest leader, or just another man chasing illusions? Let's dive in and explore this story together in today's video. From Red Prince to Emperor for Life. In a tiny room in Liangjiahe, a remote village tucked away in Shanxi province, a young Xi Jinping once slept on a mudbed and read books by the dim light of an oil lamp. It was the 1960s, during the chaos of China's Cultural Revolution. His father, Xi Jinping, a veteran revolutionary and founding member of the Chinese Communist Party, had been purged and humiliated. From a privileged red prince born into power, Xi was cast down to the very bottom of society. He dug ditches, carried manure, and lived among poor farmers. You might think those harsh years would have turned him against the brutal system that crushed his family. But instead, they forged in him something else: patience, calculation, and an extraordinary ability to survive and rise within the very cage the Communist Party had built. Xi Jinping's rise wasn't built on sudden leaps or dramatic power grabs. He climbed quietly, starting as a village party secretary in Hebei, then deputy mayor of Xiamen. From there, he steadily advanced through China's booming coastal provinces, Fujian and Zhejiang, the front lines of China's transformation into the world's factory. By 2007, when Xi entered the Politburo, he was a familiar face, but one that kept a low profile, unlike many other princelings who flaunted their power. In 2012, Xi rose to the pinnacle of power, becoming General Secretary of the Communist Party. And from that moment, his vision for the China dream began to take shape. But this dream was never just a slogan. For Xi Jinping, it was a vow to restore China to its rightful place at the center of the world. Like during the glory days of the Han and Tang dynasties, a national rejuvenation. He wanted to erase the century of humiliation when foreign powers carved China apart. He dreamed of a strong, self-reliant China in economy, technology, and military. But to realize that dream, Xi first needed absolute control at home. And that meant stepping into a dangerous game, battling rivals within the Communist Party while facing off against his greatest external challenger, the United States. The high-stakes trade war showdown with Trump. April 9th, 2025. In Zhongmanhai, the political heart of Beijing, the air was as heavy as the gray, overcast skies outside. Just hours earlier, Donald Trump had dropped a bombshell, a 125% tariff on all Chinese goods, effective immediately, adding to a previous 20% tariff related to fentanyl, bringing the total to 145%. This wasn't Trump's first tariff strike against China. During his first term, he had already slapped hundreds of billions of dollars worth of tariffs on Chinese imports, forcing Beijing to retaliate. But this time, this was different. This time, the escalation was unprecedented, and Trump wasn't stopping there. He announced a 90-day delay on new tariffs for 75 other countries. At the same time, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent issued a chilling warning. If China dared to retaliate, the U.S. would delist all 265 Chinese companies from American stock exchanges. While China had no equivalent leverage over U.S. companies in its own markets, Xi Jinping must have been feeling the heat. According to China's Ministry of Commerce, in 2024, the U.S. exported $154 billion worth of goods to China, while China shipped a staggering $487 billion to the U.S., more than 3 times the value. In a tit-for-tat tariff war, that imbalance alone meant China had far more to lose. Worse still, China's exports to the U.S. were mainly low-cost consumer goods, electronics 25%, textiles 15%, and plastics 10%, all easily replaceable by other Asian manufacturers like Malaysia, Indonesia, or Thailand. Meanwhile, U.S. exports to China were dominated by high-tech, hard-to-replace products, Boeing airplanes, medical equipment, industrial machinery. If America couldn't sell to China, it could pivot elsewhere. But China? Its exports were already nearing saturation. Even nearby countries like Vietnam or Cambodia, once key players in China's supply chain, were now facing Trump's steep tariffs. This created a dangerous domino effect. Unsold inventory, frozen supply chains, clogged warehouses, and a liquidity crisis across industries like electric vehicles, lithium-ion batteries, and consumer goods. The very sectors Xi Jinping had invested so much of his political capital in. Then there was the looming threat of Wall Street's doors slamming shut. Delisting Chinese companies wouldn't just cut off billions from investors like Alibaba and Tencent once raised. It risked triggering a chain reaction, shaken foreign confidence, fleeing investment, and a weakening yuan spiraling out of control. So why did Xi keep escalating the trade war, knowing full well the risks? The answer lies in Xi's own political playbook. Xi couldn't afford to look weak. Not to the party, not to the people. Backing down meant betraying his China dream. So on April 9th, Beijing hit back with an 84% tariff on US goods. A show of defiance, but also a risky move that pushed China's already fragile economy, weighed down by a collapsing property market and stagnant domestic consumption, closer to the edge. Yet by the end of the day, Beijing's tone had unexpectedly softened. A spokesperson for China's foreign ministry announced that China was ready to negotiate, echoing Trump's own words, that both sides need to sit down and talk. Xi Jinping realized that further escalation would only isolate China more, especially as the 75 countries spared from Trump's tariffs were now considering pivoting away from China and aligning with the US. Xi needed time, and negotiations, no matter how fragile, were the only way to buy it. The rare earth Gambit, Xi Jinping's do-or-die chess move. Xi Jinping still holds one powerful card in his hand: rare earths. China controls over 70% of the world's rare earth production. Critical minerals like neodymium, 35,000 tons per year, and cerium, 20,000 tons per year, essential for manufacturing chips, batteries, and missiles. The US, in particular, relies heavily on these materials to fuel its tech industry and military. For example, each F-35 fighter jet requires about 417 kilograms of rare earth elements. Back in 2019, when tensions with the US flared, Xi had already hinted at using rare earths as strategic leverage. Now, with Trump escalating the trade war to its highest level yet, Xi might be ready to play that card for real. A ban on rare earth exports to the US, potentially paralyzing America's tech supply chain. But this move isn't as powerful as it once was. The US has been working hard to reduce its dependence on China's rare earths, ramping up domestic mining, up to 43,000 tons by 2024, and securing new suppliers from Australia and Canada. Moreover, if Xi pulls this trigger, he risks alienating key partners like Japan, South Korea, and the EU, all of whom also rely heavily on rare earth imports and have no desire to get caught in the US. China crossfire. Today, Xi's real advantage doesn't lie in overwhelming strength. It lies in buying time, in delaying, in using every trick to survive long enough to rebuild China's internal resilience. Because right now, Xi Jinping isn't just locked in a death match with the United States, he's fighting a life-or-death battle within the Chinese Communist Party itself. The internal power struggle never truly stopped. Since launching his sweeping anti-corruption campaign in 2012, toppling political titans like Zhou Yongkang and Bo Xilai, Xi had built a fiercely loyal inner circle. But as the economy stumbles and the trade war intensifies, dissent within the party has begun to stir. Rumors are swirling. Zhang Yuxia, reportedly backed by elements of the military, is emerging as Xi's most dangerous rival. In 2023, Zhang openly criticized Xi's signature Belt and Road Initiative, accusing it of wasting $1.3 trillion without delivering clear strategic benefits. Now, amid the trade war crisis, Zhang may be gathering support, from disillusioned generals to sidelined party elites who resent Xi's consolidation of power. So what is Xi Jinping's do-or-die move? He must preserve the image of the invincible emperor. Domestically, that means tightening control over the media, ramping up propaganda, and framing the crisis as a test of national endurance. As in 2019, the People's Daily ran a front-page editorial. The Chinese nation does not fear hardship, a call for unity against American pressure. Internationally, Xi is forced to negotiate, but not from a position of weakness. He may offer limited concessions, opening China's financial markets, scaling back state subsidies, in exchange for Trump easing tariffs and dropping the threat of delisting Chinese companies from US stock exchanges. At the same time, Xi is accelerating plans for technological self-reliance, cutting China's dependence on American technology. A grand vision that may take years, if not decades, to fully realize. But for Xi Jinping, it's a battle worth waging, because in this deadly game of power, survival isn't guaranteed. But neither is defeat. The fate of a man chasing a dream. What will become of Xi Jinping? There are three possible futures awaiting him. First, if negotiations with Trump succeed, Xi may be able to temporarily stabilize his hold on power. China's economy would get a much-needed breather, the Communist Party would remain united behind him, and the China dream could still cling to life. But that success would come at a price, making concessions to the United States. And in China's political culture, where strength is everything, those compromises could slowly chip away at Xi's reputation, both among ordinary citizens and within the party's hardline factions. Second, if the trade war drags on and China's economy crumbles, Xi's authority could face its most serious challenge yet. Factional infighting within the party could erupt into open conflict. And in the worst-case scenario, Xi could be ousted in a dramatic palace coup. The history of the Chinese Communist Party is no stranger to brutal purges, from Lin Biao in 1971 to Hua Guofeng in 1976. No one understands this brutal reality better than Xi himself. Third, there's a middle path. Xi survives the crisis, but emerges weaker than before. He might retain his title as General Secretary, but real power would begin slipping from his hands. He would be forced to share influence with other factions within the party, particularly with a younger generation of leaders waiting in the wings. In this outcome, Xi's China dream might remain, but only as an unfinished story, a grand vision left behind for his successor to deal with. But before any of these scenarios can play out, one question looms large. Why did Trump start this trade war with China in the first place? Trump has long believed that China plays dirty. In a speech at the White House on March 22, 2018, he declared, "We're losing hundreds of billions of dollars due to intellectual property theft and unfair trade practices by China." He accused Beijing of manipulating its currency, forcing American companies to hand over their technology, and illegally propping up its state-owned enterprises. On August 5, 2019, Trump tweeted, "China is killing us with unfair trade deals. They devalue their currency to gain an advantage." Beyond trade, Trump and his administration repeatedly accused China of stealing America's technological secrets and infiltrating its government. The 2024 cyber attack on the US Treasury by Chinese hackers only added fuel to this narrative. There were also growing accusations of China using money, influence, and even personal relationships to corrupt American officials. In Trump's eyes, this wasn't just about trade. It was about survival. America's survival. And that brings us back to Xi Jinping. Was his vision for building the China dream over the past decade the right strategy for China? The ideological mistake and the burden of dictatorship. Xi Jinping still believes the China dream is his destiny. Time and again, he looks to Mao Zedong, the symbol of absolute power. At Mao's 120th birthday celebration in 2013, Xi praised him as the lighthouse guiding the Chinese nation. Like Mao, Xi centralized power. His anti-corruption purge from 2013 to 2020 crushed over 1.5 million officials. In 2018, he erased term limits, declaring himself China's leader for life. A bold move, even Deng Xiaoping never dared. But here lies the fatal flaw. Mao's obsession with control led to catastrophe. His Great Leap Forward, 1958 to 1962, led to the deaths of 30 to 45 million people from famine, driven by unrealistic economic planning. The Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 1976, shattered China's social fabric and set its economy back decades. And now Xi seems to be repeating many of Mao's catastrophic mistakes, holding on to a rigid communist dictatorship where a single party controls everything: the economy, ideology, even personal life. Xi believes only absolute power can lead China to national rejuvenation. But history and reality suggest otherwise. To surpass America's $28 trillion economy, lead in technology, and dominate militarily, China needs freedom, innovation, and competition. America became a superpower not through state control, but through democratic institutions and a free market that fostered innovation. Companies like Apple, 3 trillion market cap, and Tesla, 1.2 trillion, thrived because of that environment. China, too, experienced miraculous growth from 1978 to 2010, its GDP rising from $150 billion to $6 trillion. Precisely because Deng Xiaoping loosened control and opened the economy to the world. But under Xi, that trend has reversed. He tightened control over private businesses, slapping Alibaba with a $2.8 billion fine in 2021. He enforced strict data regulations with the Data Security Law in 2021. He cracked down on free speech, imprisoning over 300 journalists between 2013 and 2023. And the result? GDP growth fell from 10% in 2010 to 4.5% in 2024. Foreign direct investment dropped by 20%, from $136 billion in 2022 to $108 billion in 2024. The greatest burden on Xi's China dream isn't America, or Trump, or even internal rivals. It's the very communist system he refuses to reform. It stifles innovation, like semiconductor project, which despite $50 billion in investment, still lags 5 to 7 years behind Taiwan's TSMC. It breeds systemic corruption, with local government debt soaring to $13 trillion in 2024, roughly 70% of China's GDP. And it isolates China internationally, as countries like Japan and India shift supply chains to Vietnam, whose FDI surged 30% to $36 billion in 2024. If Xi refuses to reform China's political system, his dream may forever remain an illusion. A China strong in military might but weak economically. Not unlike the Soviet Union before its collapse in 1991. Xi Jinping has undeniably built the largest military in Asia, 2.5 million troops, and a navy that outnumbers America's 370 ships versus 290 in 2024. But he may have also cornered himself into a game with no good exits. His ideological devotion to Mao, his increasing authoritarianism, and the communist system he clings to are eroding the very foundation the China dream needs to become reality. Will Xi become a second Mao, leaving behind a legacy of power, but also an economic ruin? Or will history remember him as a man defeated by his own overreaching dream, a man who built castles in the sand? The answer lies in his next moves, in his battle with Trump, his confrontation with Zhang Yuxia, and in whether he dares to confront the very system he's built his power upon. What do you think about Xi Jinping's choices? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.